For those who have experienced the challenges of a negative or oppressive haunting, there are few things more terrifying. Supernatural forces that may traverse into the boundaries of the demonic and oppressive can be life-shifting and, in rarer cases, perhaps even dangerous. This next story is about one such case that occurred in an otherwise peaceful and tranquil blue-collar community in Pennsylvania, where a family had their peace and tranquility there shattered by a malevolent entity that sought nothing more than to drive them away by inducing fear and, in some cases, inflicting bodily harm. Tonight, we cross into the realm of the demonic, because this is extremely strange. It was in the winter of 1988 when Bob Cranmer and his wife Lisa moved their young family into a 105-year-old Victorian home at 3406 Brownsville Road in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was a home Bob had long aspired to purchase and eventually did so at a remarkably reasonable price, submitting only a single bid without any negotiating with its enthusiastic and motivated seller. It's often said that if something is too good to be true, it probably is. In the case of the Cranmer family, this would certainly ring true, as they would be plunged into a virtual nightmare of chaos related to paranormal occurrences that would plague them almost from the very day they moved in. Bob and Lisa Cranmer were married in 1980, while Bob served as an officer in the U.S. Army. He eventually left the service in 1986 and went to work for AT&T. Bob was then transferred to his native Pittsburgh at the same time the house he admired as a youth came on the market. There are a range of sordid tales attached to the home, including one of a mother and her 3 children who were killed and buried on the property by natives during the Northwest Indian War in an effort to discourage settlers who were appropriating the surrounding lands. Another was of a poor immigrant worker who, out of jealousy and misplaced anger at the affluent owners, cursed the house while it was being constructed. Then there is the account of a doctor who once performed illegal abortions in the home. Beyond the assumed identity of this doctor, reports of his illicit practices are based on inquiries and presumptions without using his true name in a book Bob Cranmer went on to write, detailing his family's experiences there. Before they had even closed on the house, there were signs that something about the place wasn't quite right. As they returned from a walkthrough in the basement, Bob found one of his sons sitting on the stairs in tears with no real explanation as to why he was so upset. At that time, it was written off as perhaps an expression of the emotional adjustment about moving to a new home. The sellers had also informed Bob that they sometimes held Catholic Mass in the house, which, as a former altar boy, struck him as odd, as the Catholic Mass of Communion is not performed outside of a church except under the most extraordinary circumstances. From the time they moved in, there was just a weird feeling about the house that was unshakable. A sense of being observed and a palpable unease when they were inside, as if something frightful was always on the verge of happening that put everyone on edge. Bob and Lisa felt they were somehow interlopers in the home, and their presence was, at best, being tolerated. Lisa had deeper misgivings about living in such a large house that, in her words, gave her the creeps. Trepidation soon evolved into physical realities, when they began to experience unusual activities that began with lights flickering on and off and objects going missing. In one instance, the pull chain of a light inside a closet was constantly found wrapped around the light instead of merely hanging as it was left. At first, these could be chalked up as perplexing but minor inconveniences, but the occurrences would grow in both scope and intensity. There was also the unmistakable smell of sulfur permeating the home, which occurred quite often. Soon, loud knocks would emit from the walls and floors, followed by the distinctive sound of footsteps throughout the house when everyone else's presence was accounted for. Items would be found broken, and in one of the more disturbing occurrences, a bent crucifix was found lying on the floor. One room in the house was the cause of a more pressing concern. They called it simply the Blue Room, named so because of the matching color of the rug and wallpaper. Their children would sleep in this room and would constantly claim there was something or someone inside the room with them that was not of this world, and that would manifest itself as a dark form followed by a horrible odor. It reached the point that often they would refuse to sleep there. In the case of 3-year-old Bobby, when a priest came in to bless the room, he threw a tantrum and refused to allow him in. For the better part of a year, the boy would go into the room, go into a walk-in closet, turn on the light, and sleep on the floor because he found the room scary. These claims would, over time, give way to more terrifying incidents, such as the night the Cranmer's son-in-law witnessed a huge shadow lurking over the children's beds as they slept that, upon discovery, swiftly darted away into a dark crawl space and vanished from his sight. The Cranmer's grandson also had a frightening episode when he too saw this dark entity and burst into tears, insisting to his concerned family, trying to console him, that the monster will get me. The visitations would get bolder and more frequent as time went on. The sinister form would be seen more often in the house, and sometimes even heard crawling its way through the walls. These intrusions would eventually take on a more physical nature, as the family would be assaulted by invisible hands whenever they were in or around the Blue Room, that resulted in scratches and bruises on their bodies. One of the more vicious attacks resulted in one of the Cranmer's sons displaying what appeared to be claw marks on his chest. Bob Cranmer was now convinced this was not the work of an angry spirit, but more likely something demonic in nature, and set about reading Bible passages aloud and placing religious icons throughout the house as a means of spiritual protection. But these actions only served to anger whatever this thing was that was sharing their home. Bob would recall having a Bible snatched from his hands, rosaries found damaged, scratches on his neck, and crucifixes constantly bent and twisted. Whenever the then popular film Passion of the Christ was frequently on television, it would enrage the entity to the point the TV would shut off by itself, and then all hell would literally break loose. Crucifixes would be torn off the family's necks or sometimes even bent in half as they wore them, as they attempted to ward off the malevolent spirit. Bob would tell of the day when, working in his garden, he unearthed a box that contained rosary beads and some religious medals. When he phoned the former owner to inquire about it, he claimed he was told in no uncertain terms to return it to the place it was found and rebury it. No reason was given why. Disturbingly, a hidden room was discovered inside the house they were totally unaware of. When it was accessed, they found a number of the Cranmer children's toys inside that had gone missing, leaving them with no idea how they wound up there. In the 1990s, Bob would go on to a career in politics, becoming a councilman and subsequently county commissioner, achieving a high-profile status in the Pittsburgh area. But in that time frame, Lisa and 2 of their children would endure some serious psychological problems, which resulted in all being hospitalized at various points for observation. Bob could not be certain their issues were related to the paranormal activity in the house, but in 2003, he was attacked by his son Bobby Jr., which resulted in Bob temporarily being placed under arrest. After his release the following morning, an aunt living with them was found dead in her bed from natural causes. Now, it should be noted that young Bobby had a history of schizophrenia from a very young age, and that can manifest itself in various ways, including outbursts of anger and violence. Sadly, and all too often, those dealing with mental illness are assumed to be under some form of possession or control by a malevolent entity, and this kind of misdiagnosis can lead to disastrous results, both for them and those close to them. Having nowhere else to turn, with their life savings invested in the house, and the family enduring these disturbing incidents over a number of years, Bob reached out to an acquaintance, the mayor of Pittsburgh, Tom Murphy, who contacted Bishop Donald Wuerl to call upon the Catholic Church for assistance and guidance for the family. Father Ron Langwin was assigned the case, assisted by several other priests, as well as a psychic named Connie Valenti. A 2-year battle to cleanse the home of the demonic spirit ensued, as a number of bishops and priests visited the house to perform house blessings or sometimes full-on exorcisms. In many cases, the clergy themselves would witness the bizarre activities, and in one case, a priest claimed to watch as blood flowed down the stairs, which he then soaked with holy water to bring an end to the gruesome scene. One set of guests were the paranormal team from Penn State University that would eventually develop into A&E's Paranormal State, led by Ryan Buell, who claimed he saw a crucifix bent in half right in front of him, as well as seeing blood manifest on the walls. It took until 2006 for the home to be declared cleansed of the evil presence, and Bob would eventually go on to write a book of the family ordeal in 2014 called The Demon of Brownsville Road, which took longer than expected as, according to Bob, the process was met with a host of setbacks and problems, which he attributed to a story not wanting to be told. In March of 2015, Bob and Lisa's son David, a Marine Corps vet, would take his own life, with Lisa experiencing severe depression as a result, and the couple would divorce in 2018 after 37 years of marriage. Now within this story exists two sides of a coin, so let's flip it and look at the case through an objective lens. First, it's significant that Monsignor Ron Langwin supports all aspects of the book Cranmer wrote in terms of its legitimacy and credibility. On the other hand, the story has met with some pushback from the children and grandchildren of multiple previous owners whose presence there spanned 47 years. They claimed there were never any reports or experiences of paranormal activity connected to the house during their tenures. The occupants prior to the Wagners, the couple who sold the home to the Cranmers, are said to have been irate they sold to Bob and Lisa. Bob Cranmer stated he felt the root of their issue was likely a concern over the non-disclosure that the house had long been considered haunted, and as such is now what's commonly referred to as a stigmatized property, even though Pennsylvania has no law that requires that kind of information be disclosed to any potential buyer. However, in his book, Bob claims that one of the now deceased Wagner daughters, Barbara, albeit reluctantly, claims she had experienced some bizarre happenings while living there. This assertion, however, has been disputed by her daughter Karen. Then there's the son of a gentleman who grew up in the neighborhood in the 1930s, who said his father would often talk of the house being haunted, and that a son of the Joyce family, who owned the home before the Wagners, reported some weird goings-on during their time there before Cranmer's book was ever published. The doctor who was said to run an illegal abortion service out of the house is an interesting case. For the record, his name first came under scrutiny when psychic Connie Valenti claimed she had received a revelation that the house was occupied by a Dr. M, who performed these procedures. It was assumed the Dr. M in question was James Merton Mahan, who owned the Mahan Hospital in Arlington. Monsignor Langwin and Cranmer seemed to support the idea of a Dr. M existing, purposefully not naming Mahan directly, but the allegation isn't backed up with any hard evidence. Lending even more doubt to poor Dr. Mahan's involvement is his grandson Dean, who revealed his grandfather did not even live on Brownsville Road at the time the abortions are purported to have taken place. When he did move there after a divorce, he passed away in his home at 3233 Brownsville Road. No record of him ever committing these offenses exists, though Cranmer insists at the time it was common knowledge that a Dr. M was responsible. Adding fuel to this fire, a granddaughter of Dr. Mahan contacted Bob to let him know that while she was a bit too young to understand anything about abortion practices, her grandfather was, in her words, not a very nice man, and would occasionally throw his shoes at her when she was just a toddler when he became upset, but this is hardly proof of anything other than the doctor being a man of quick temper based on an anecdotal story. The events taking place at 3406 Brownsville Road have been documented and retold in a host of paranormal reality shows, and the rights to a movie about the family's experiences have been sold to New Line Cinema. In 2019, it was announced that the house was being converted into a bed and breakfast to be called the Brownsville Roadhouse, where, according to its owner, Bob Cranmer, Ouija boards and ghost hunters will not be allowed in, claiming the home is safe now and that he prefers to keep it that way. As we've seen with many locations that are reputedly haunted, the Brownsville house is not without its share of controversy and contradiction. The evolution of the home into a bed and breakfast with no plans to hold ghost hunts or ghost tours is actually a checkmark in Bob Cranmer's favor, as he's passing up on an opportunity to cash in with paranormal enthusiasts who likely would pay top dollar for the opportunity to investigate there. The newly appointed bed and breakfast is a wonder of beauty, and the reviews from guests staying there are glowing. So perhaps, as the saying goes, things are darkest before the dawn, and in this case, it appears light triumphed over darkness.